First, I have some requests for you. Number one, please do not post photos with me in them in Facebook or its subsidiaries, Instagram and WhatsApp. That company is a monstrous surveillance engine. It recognizes people in photos by their faces or even the backs of their heads. So if you post a photo where a certain person appears in Facebook or its subsidiaries, you are helping that company track that person. You're treating that person badly. Please don't do that to me. And by the way, I have never been a used of Facebook. I don't have a Facebook account. I hope you won't let Facebook use you either. People don't use Facebook. Facebook uses people. Uses people to get data about other people. Second, if you want to make a recording of this talk and distribute copies, please do that only in the formats that are favorable to free software, the formats that you can play without yourself running any non-free software. And please make sure that the website of distribution permits downloading a copy without the visitors running any non-free software. Not even non-free JavaScript software, which I never run. I block it because I won't run non-free programs. I don't trust them. And also, please put on the copies you distribute the license Creative Commons No Derivatives, because this is not a technical presentation. This is about politics and ethics. So, this talk is about privacy, which relates closely to free software. They overlap a lot, but they are also separate. Privacy is extremely important. When a great hero, Edward Snowden, informed us how much the government was snooping on our web browsing, the rate of access to certain Wikipedia pages fell by 20%. Pages like Al-Qaeda, bomb, these people, they were not terrorists, but they were afraid that the government would treat them as terrorists if they were seen looking up certain topics in the encyclopedia. So people are intimidated by the knowledge that they're being watched all the time. But it threatens democracy more directly. You see, democracy means that people control what the state does. How do we have control over it? First, we have to know what the state does. The state tends to hide its actions. And the only way we find out is through whistleblowers, heroes like Edward Snowden. 3 cheers for Edward Snowden. Hip, hip, hooray. Hip, hip, hooray. Hip, hip, hooray. But the government doesn't want the people to find out about its secret, tricky, nasty, perhaps criminal behaviors. So the government declares the whistleblower to be a spy and a traitor and tries to put the hero in prison. And at this point, if the government can identify the whistleblower, it's too dangerous to be a whistleblower. If we want to find out what the state is doing so that we, the people, can have control over it, we need to make whistleblowers safe. But if the government can tell who goes where and who talks with whom, there's no way for the journalist source, the whistleblower, to talk with the journalist and have the government not know. So we must reduce the level of data collection about people down to the point where the state can't tell who's talking with journalists. Any system of data collection that enables the state to find out who talked with that journalist is a deadly threat to democracy. And no matter what supposed secondary purpose this data collection serves, we don't dare permit it to continue. Well, the reason that we are subject now to more surveillance than there was in the Soviet Union is that digital technology made it possible. And the first disaster of digital technology was proprietary software that people would install and run on their own computers, and they wouldn't know what it's doing. They can't tell what it's doing. And that was the first injustice that I began fighting in 1983. Proprietary software, software that is not free, libre, software that the users don't control. When I say free software, I'm talking about freedom, not price. I don't mean software that doesn't cost you money. The price is a side issue. I don't care at all. I have paid money for copies of free software. I've sold copies of free software. The price is a minor detail. I care about freedom. All the software I develop respects the user's freedom, whether they pay me for a copy or not. But what is a program anyway? It's a bunch of instructions that tell a computer what to do. All the computer knows how to do is get an instruction and do what that says. Get the next instruction, do what that says, over and over. The instructions come from the program, and depending on which program is giving instructions to the computer, it can do anything. Well, there's some things that are impossible. But within the limits of what's possible, the same computer can do anything with the right program. Well, who is giving the instructions to your computer? You might think it's you. Hello? You might think it's you when, in fact, it's somebody else. You might think your computer is... Hello? You might think your computer is obeying you when really it's obeying the real master first. And then it only obeys you when the real master says it's okay. With every program, there are two possibilities. Either the users control the program or the program controls the users. This is a free program. It's free software if the users control it. And that's why it respects their freedom. Otherwise, it's a non-free, proprietary, user-subjugating program. In order for the program to be free, practically speaking, it must give the users the 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0 is to run the program however you wish for whatever purpose you have. Freedom 1 is... Hello? A slide has disappeared. Well, in any case, freedom 1 is the freedom to study and change the source code. Now, you can see some source code that's like a mixture of English and math. If you've learned that programming language, you can read it and understand it, and then you can change it. But to run it, we convert it into executable code, which is very hard for anybody to understand. That's called reverse engineering. So practically speaking, in order for users to be free to study and change the program, they've got to have the source code. So freedom 1 is freedom to study the source code and change it so it does your computing activity the way you wish. Now, these two freedoms give us separate control. So each user controls per copies. I'm free to change my copies, you're free to change your copies. Well, this is essential, but it's not enough because most users don't know how to program. But they also deserve control over their computing. And the way we give it to them is through collective control, meaning the freedom to work in a group to exercise control over what the program does. Here you see a group of 3 users. 2 of them are changing the code. They must be programmers. And the third one is not changing the code. Maybe that's a user of the program who doesn't program, doesn't write code, but they discuss together what changes to make. So even the non-programmer participates in having control over what that program does. And then there are 2 other users who are also using the program, but they're not working with those 3. It's up to you whether you work with other people, and it's up to them too. Those who want to work together, they do, and when they don't, they don't. Collective control is the way that non-programmers can participate in deciding what that program should do. And it requires 2 more freedoms. Freedom 2 is to make exact unmodified copies and give or sell them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is to make copies of your modified versions and give or sell them to others when you wish. Now, selling is perfectly legitimate because we don't say it has to be gratis. That's not our issue. Freedom is our issue. So when the program carries these 4 freedoms, the users control it, it respects their freedom, that's free software. But if one of these freedoms is missing or incomplete, then the program controls the users and the proprietor controls the program. So this program, because it's not free software, is an instrument of unjust power. It gives the proprietor power over the program's users. This by itself is a reason why non-free software is an injustice. Non-free software should not exist. Non-free software oppresses its users, and therefore I won't use it. I don't have any. I go out of my way to make sure nobody does that to me. And I also, because of my conscience, refuse to help do that to other people. I've got to treat them ethically too. It's not just I who deserves freedom, it's everyone who deserves freedom for the same reasons in the same way. Well, this is the first injustice, but because the proprietors know that they have power over users, they're tempted to mistreat users with that power. They put in malicious functionalities. This is why the widely used proprietary programs are typically malware. And among other things, they often spy on their users. Here's a shocking example. This is Amazon's ebook reader, the Amazon Swindle. It transmits from time to time the name of the book being read and the page number to Amazon servers. If the user enters any notes, they're sent to Amazon too. Total Orwellian surveillance of the user. Now, when I find out a product is this malicious, I would never think of using it. I say, absolutely not. I don't care what convenience or options or choices it offers me. I refuse to be oppressed this way. Take that swindle and step on it. And lots of proprietary programs spy. Windows spies, Mac OS spies, iOS spies, Flash Player spies. Thousands of apps spy on the user. And then there are the, there's another one that's missing here too. Strange. There was a picture here of the Shitbit, the device that keeps track of how you walk and sends the data to a company and then says, would you like to buy this data back from me, data about you yourself? And who else can I sell it to? The point is, that's an advanced form of spying. Whenever there's an app or a product that's tied to a particular server, that's something automatically that's going to shaft you. And that's why the Internet of Things, well, I call it the Internet of Stings. It's a way that these companies can get power over more things in your life, snoop on more things in your life, and have total power. And they start by saying it's optional. And then your insurance company says, if you use it, we'll give you a discount. And slowly that morphs into, if you don't use it, we're going to charge you extra. And almost everybody feels compelled to say yes. And if we applied that kind of standard to consent to sex, it would be basically defining that there's always consent, isn't there? Which shows it's the wrong standard to apply, and it's wrong here too. When people are systematically pressured into saying yes, they're not really saying yes. This is another kind of malicious functionality, DRM, Digital Restrictions Management, the functionality of stopping people from doing the things they want to do. Any device with DRM is clearly designed to fight against the user. So that's malware. Then there is the backdoor of functionality to let somebody remotely attack the user. The Amazon swindle has a backdoor for erasing books. We saw this in 2009. Amazon remotely erased thousands of books, thousands of copies of the same book. It was 1984 by George Orwell. So, of course, this stimulated a lot of criticism. So Amazon said it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. Right. Even if Amazon had meant that seriously, it would not be an adequate response. But Amazon didn't mean it seriously. It was just supposed to sound like a promise, supposed to take away the momentum from the critics, because a few years later, Amazon went back to remotely erasing books at a distance, by force, without even an order from the state. And then there's censorship. The iPhone introduced the practice of designing general-purpose computers to censor the application software. And when users who didn't like being afflicted with censorship found ways to bypass the censorship and install unapproved applications or their own applications, they called it jailbreaking, which means, in effect, the iPhone is a jail. That's what we call it. Well, then there is the universal backdoor. Windows has had a universal backdoor since Windows XP. A universal backdoor means that they can forcibly change the software at a distance. It's a universal backdoor in the same sense that a computer is a universal computing engine. It can be programmed to do absolutely any nasty thing to the user. Just write the code to do that nasty thing and forcibly install it. Another system that, Windows has had it since Windows XP. And nowadays, Microsoft even admits it. Since Windows 7, Microsoft admits that there's a universal backdoor. But that's not the only thing. Portable phones, every portable phone has a universal backdoor. That's how they remotely convert them into full-time listening devices. So, what is a mobile phone? It tracks a person's movements all the time. It's always sending signals saying, here I am, here's where you should tell me about phone calls or text messages. It has to do that, in order for it to function. But the effect is that the phone company finds out always where it is and can localize it very precisely by triangulation from multiple towers. And it gets more accurate every year as they add more towers. And with the back door, they can convert it into a full-time listening device that hears all the conversation in the room, even when it's not making any call, even when it's supposed to be switched off. You see, a mobile phone has no off switch. It only has a button saying, would you please be so kind as to switch off? But once it's been modified, it is not so kind anymore. It doesn't switch off. You push the button and it pretends to switch off, but it keeps running and listening and transmitting all the time. I call this Stalin's dream. This is what Stalin would have yearned for. If someone had told Stalin, I'll show you how to make a device, they'll be cheap, you can give one to everybody in the Soviet Union, and it will send signals saying where they are all the time, and all their conversations will be listened to and sent back to headquarters if you're interested in them. Stalin would have said, wow, that's wonderful, design it for me, and then he would have killed you. But the point is, Stalin couldn't do that. It might have been too far-fetched even for him to dream of. But this is what's happening today. And I expect that most of you here have made the mistake of starting to carry one of these devices. I never have. because I see how horrible it is. I see, and I know how much this kind of surveillance is dangerous to democracy. People, of course, are intimidated individually, but I realize that the threat to democracy is even worse. I can refuse to be intimidated, but I can't keep democracy going if people are scared to be whistleblowers and talk to journalists. So I know I've got to fight to put an end to this kind of surveillance. And this is why I don't carry a mobile phone and never have, because it's my duty as a citizen. It's not so much that I'm concerned they might be listening to me, because I don't have that kind of secret very much in my life. No, it's simply that I think it's everyone's duty to refuse, and I'm doing my duty, even if others are not yet doing their duty. I've got to set an example to try to convince more people to do their duty, to reject these systems of massive, pervasive surveillance. If you're using any proprietary software, most likely some of it is malware. I've already given you examples like Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android. They all have malware in them. Malware means a program designed to run in a way that hurts the user, and those programs are malware. But there are a lot of other proprietary programs which might or might not be malware, and we don't know. We're unable to find out. The same developers that are tempted to make them malware also prevent us from finding out whether they're malware. This is a situation that's a recipe for corruption. So of course, power corrupts. The developers of proprietary software face this temptation, and a lot of them are corrupt, and the rest we don't know. There are dozens of proprietary programs we know are malware, and then there are thousands more where we don't know and we can't find out. So every proprietary program is either certain malware or possible malware, which means you can never have a rational basis to trust it. It's blind faith or nothing. Shut your eyes and take the risk. The only way to have a rational basis to trust a program is if it's free software, because then the users are checking it from time to time. That's the only defense against malware, the only known defense. It's not perfect, because users are not systematically checking everything all the time. So we can't guarantee that a free program is malware, but at least we've got a fighting chance. If you use a proprietary program, you're basically asking to be taken. So that's why we developed the GNU plus Linux system, why you should escape and come to the free world. However, you've got to be selective about which GNU/Linux distro you use. GNU/Linux is basically the GNU operating system, which I started in 1984, plus Linux, which is the kernel, which was combined with GNU in 1992. And basically, it's a free operating system, but there are thousands of distros, and most of them contain some non-free software, as you can see up there. The red things are non-free applications, non-free drivers, whatever. And over there, you see a distro that's entirely free software. There are a few of those. Look at gnu.org/distros for details to find the free distros. Now, when you release a free program, there are two different ways. Actually, there are lots, but I don't have time to talk about all those details. You can release it under a weak license, a pushover license that doesn't know how to say no. Things like the Apache license, or the two different BSD licenses, or the two different so-called MIT licenses. Those are weak licenses. They don't know how to say no. They say, oh, take this code and do whatever you like with it. And what happens is companies come over and they take that code and they turn it into a proprietary program and use it to impose their power on users. And that's bad. You shouldn't let them do that, because that way your code becomes part of subjugating people. You're not the one subjugating them, someone else is, but you could have refused. And the way to do that is with Copyleft, with the GNU General Public License, or GNU GPL, which says, use this and do whatever you like as long as you respect other people's freedom too. The GPL says you have the freedom to distribute copies with or without modifications, but there's a condition about how you distribute those copies. You must provide the source code of what you distribute, and you must provide it under the same license, the same GNU General Public License. And this way, you must respect the freedom of other users in the same way that we respected freedom for you. You must pass along the code, including your changes and additions, with the same freedoms that you got from us. The idea of Copyleft is to actively defend freedom for others, because as we know, if we just give people all the time the option to surrender their freedom, and if they get some momentary convenience in exchange for surrendering their freedom, modern society and media are really good at pressuring everybody to give up their freedom. And the next thing you know, there's a society in which nobody has freedom anymore. So we need to defend freedom together for each other. If you think that there's a problem in using the GNU GPL for your code, first look at gnu.org/licenses, and then write to licensing@gnu.org if you need concrete help. And if anybody is telling you reasons why you supposedly can't use the GPL, lots of people are wrong about what they say about that. So contact me if necessary. Make sure that the reasons they're giving you are not foolish imagination. Apple is very hostile to the GNU GPL. Apple is directly and indirectly trying to pressure people not to defend the user's freedom. Please join us in standing up to Apple. Now, when we use the GPL, often the result is that businesses join in developing the free version. Since they're not allowed to fork a non-free version, of the remaining alternatives, they decide the best thing is to contribute to improving free software. And their contributions are welcome. Now, the one other point about this is you may have heard people use the term open source. I never use that term because it was invented for a very specific reason, to disconnect the software that's free that we had developed from the ideals of the free software movement. They liked the software. They disagreed with our ethical views. They wanted to be able to promote the software such that no one would ever hear our ethical views again. Since then, in 1998, I have to go campaigning, giving speeches and so on about free software, because otherwise people would only hear from the open source people who would never say these things. If you've heard open source advocates talking, you know they don't say these things. Well, lots of them cite my name and give the impression that I agree with them. I've seen articles that called me the father of open source. You know, it's enough to make me tear my hair out. But after a few seconds, I realized there's something constructive I can do. So I sent a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, it was conceived through artificial insemination using stolen sperm without my knowledge or consent. And then I explain what the free software movement is and what it stands for and say, this is what I really stand for. That, of course, is the serious purpose of the letter to the editor, but it's fun to start with a joke. So, which you support is up to you. The problem is that most people supported open source, and the businesses preferred the term open source because then they'd avoid hinting that there's anything unethical about their proprietary software products. And so the mass media started saying open source, and generally you don't hear about free, libre software in the mass media or the important tech media. But you can help change that. If you support freedom, you can say free, libre software. Whatever other people do, at least you will be making people aware of these ethical issues. And that's, in some sense, the easiest way to help us. It doesn't take much work. It does take persistence. Especially when you're in a discussion with other people who are saying open source, if you say, this needs to be free software, we have to respect users' freedom. This is not just a question of what's most practically convenient. This is a question of our duty to others as citizens in a free society. You may not win, but even when you don't win, you'll help show other people what these ideas are, and that is advancing the cause, whether or not you win one particular issue. It's very important. The one other point about free software is that schools and governments should only run free software. Schools, when they teach people to use a proprietary program, they are implanting dependence on a particular company. That's the opposite of the social mission of a school. And this applies to all levels, from kindergarten to university and to adult education. Educational activities must never teach the use of a proprietary program. And technical universities, they should teach reverse engineering to help people get the secrets out of proprietary programs so that the free world can implement them. So proprietary software is one of the main ways of snooping on people, but it's not the only one. Proprietary software enables them to turn your own devices into spies against you. And the one way we can basically stop that is by insisting on only free software. But that's not the only kind of way, that's not the only way to snoop on us. It's also done by systems that we work with but don't belong to us, like ISPs and phone companies. The phone companies record all the text messages you get or receive or send. They record what calls you make, although in general not what you say. And these records are kept often for years. And then anybody can get those records. Supposedly they're only available to Big Brother, but in fact, due to bad design in, I think it's signaling system 7, which is a system for communication between phone networks, anybody who's willing to commit a crime can pretend to be another phone network and say, hey, I'm trying to find number 503-10904 and get the information about where it has been and what text messages it have, the text of the text messages and what calls it has made and anything. The burglar who's interested in whether you're out of town can get that information too. Now, we can't directly change those systems because they don't belong to us. We have to go through politics to get them changed. We have to say to our governments, don't tell them they have to save data about us. Tell them they can't save any data about us. Protect our privacy. Now, governments have a long list of fears that they can stir up in people so that people will give up their own freedom out of panic. Now, one of them is terrorists. But governments when they cease to be democratic, are a much bigger danger than terrorists. You know, Bush II killed more Americans in war, supposedly aimed at Al-Qaeda, than the Al-Qaeda terrorists killed. And of course, that's only counting the Americans. There were also hundreds of thousands of Iraqis that Bush killed by that invasion, who were never really counted. The way we keep a government safe for us is by democracy. And that means stopping the government from tracking us all the time. But then there are also the private organizations that try to track us. It wasn't easy for me to get in here. They sent me an announcement saying, since you're a speaker, download our app, and that will be your registration. I wrote back saying, well, you know, I don't have anything that app could run on, and anyway, it's a proprietary program, so I wouldn't have it. And they said, well, we have a website too. They said, we also have a website. Connect to our website and register. I visited their website, and the screen appeared blank because it was designed to work entirely through proprietary JavaScript, and I have the settings in my browser, so it checks the license of the JavaScript code, and if it's not free software, it doesn't run. So I wrote back. I was having tremendous fun, you see. They'd already bought the airline ticket. I had nothing to lose. Well, it would have been a loss for me if I couldn't have spoken to you, but the point is, I had them over a barrel. They had to find another way, and they did, of course. But the point is, it's not just to me that they shouldn't do this. They shouldn't do this to you either. None of you should. In fact, you shouldn't have to say who you really are to get into an event, any event. Maybe they charge money. Okay, pay. You should be able to pay anonymously. So basically, there's been a progression of injustice in computing, from proprietary software to web services, and the only thing worse than web services is proprietary mobile apps. The web service typically requires you to run some proprietary JavaScript code on your own machine. But beyond that, it's collecting lots of data on you. That proprietary JavaScript code often includes spying malware. You know, it may fingerprint the browser trying to figure out who you are if you didn't want to tell it. This is nasty treatment of the public. The companies that do this deserve to be heaped with criticism and disgust. And they also deserve to be blocked. An ethical website, I say, runs with JavaScript disabled, so that the only data it gets from you is what you choose to give it. And people who invite you to an event shouldn't ask who you are. When I see an announcement that says register through Eventbrite, I send a message explaining why it's wrong to do that. If possible, I post it on the same list that the announcement was posted on, because people have got to stop tolerating being asked for data about themselves. But then there are the systems that snoop on us that we have. There are other systems that snoop on us. For instance, there are insurance companies that say you can pay less for insurance if you put our tracking device in your car. There are cars that are built with tracking devices in them. A friend of mine bought a Nissan Leaf, and I warned him it may be tracking you. He found out that it had a cell phone modem built in. He unscrewed it. Bravo for him. But when the insurance company says you'll have to pay $50 a month if you don't let us track you, there's another method we can use to stop that. It's called democracy. We have to get laws passed saying insurance companies can't ask people to reveal data or have the car collect data outside of a certain limited set. I would say collecting data about the pattern of use of the controls of the car and saving it for a period of 1 minute before a crash, that's legitimate. And if you don't have a crash, they'll never get any data. But keeping track of where you have been, that must be forbidden. And by the way, be very scared of driverless cars. And not for the reason that you've heard. They're making a big fuss about what if it should collide with somebody, and what if it has to decide to save this person or that person. But those things are going to be so rare that they're insignificant as an issue anyway. I expect that if they start letting driverless cars carry people around, it'll be because they're very safe. So let's not worry about that. Let's look at the real danger, which is that you don't control where it's going. Now, Uber is totally unjust because it makes users run a non-free app and then identify themselves. For these reasons, I absolutely refuse to ride in an Uber car, even if somebody else ran the app and paid for the ride, because I don't want Uber to succeed in its goal of wiping out ordinary taxis that you can call on the street and pay cash to. So I don't want to give Uber any tiny bit of success, and I hope you'll join me. Look at stallman.org/uber.html. But when and there are other reasons. For instance, I sometimes call the company Goober because it pays drivers peanuts. Of course, it's going to fire all those drivers once it has driverless cars, but it'll still insist on identifying people. So here's the danger of that. You say, I want a car to take me to the theater. The car comes up, you get in, and it says, hello, Mr. Dissident. And the doors are locked, and it drives you to the secret police headquarters. You can't control that. And this points out the forgotten danger of AI. There is a lot of discussion of whether AI is safe, focusing on the question of whether it might autonomously do things that destroy humanity. And so people talk about how do we make sure that the AI is under the control of humans? Well, I agree, that's a first requisite. But then you've got to ask, which humans is it under the control of, and can you trust them? So just because the AI won't go totally rogue and wipe out humanity, that doesn't mean it's not bad. That doesn't mean we can trust it. If the AI is controlled by Google, it will be anytime we deal with it, it will be spying on us, collecting data about us. It's not enough to insist that the AI has to be under some human's control. If before you start dealing with it, you've got to ask whether it's under your control when dealing with you. And with the voice response systems that exist today, that's not so. A computer with a microphone that talks to some sort of speech understanding system that's remote, that's on somebody else's server, you can't trust that. I was once visiting a house where there was an Alexa device, and it was in a room that I spent a lot of time sitting in and working in, so I unplugged it. I figured that way it wouldn't be listening to my conversations. Those things are very dangerous, and we shouldn't get used to them, because even if most of the time it only listens when you say, Alexa, It can be changed remotely to listen to you all the time. And then, of course, there are the systems that exist only to snoop on people and track people, like cameras in the street that recognize car license plates and track cars everywhere, and they record every car that goes by. For our privacy's sake, we have to pass laws requiring those systems to be modified so that they only notice a license plate if it's either invalid or in a list of plates that are subject to specific court orders. Everyone else who is not wanted for arrest will just, the camera just shouldn't see those cars. It should only see the cars it has some legitimate reason to see. And that way, the system will do some good and it won't do harm. What about cameras in the street to recognize people's faces or the backs of their heads? Those are extremely dangerous too. We have to distinguish between security cameras and surveillance cameras. A security camera records locally, and the recording gets overwritten after a few weeks. And if there's a crime, you go there and you take the recording and you use it. And otherwise, it just gets overwritten. But once that camera is connected to any kind of transmission to any other place, then it starts being dangerous because it enables massive surveillance. So it's really important to prohibit surveillance cameras. Only security cameras should be allowed. I've got a series of proposals for how to make certain systems safe in terms of not exposing us to massive data collection. And the list of them is in gnu.org/philosophy/surveillance-vs-democracy.html. Oh, and I should also mention, we need to make our payments anonymously. We have developed something called GNU Taler, that's T-A-L-E-R, which is an anonymous payment system. It's not a currency. The payments are denominated in some official currency. But the point is, they're anonymous for the one who pays, but they are not anonymous for the one who receives the payment, the store. So the store can take payment from customers, and no one can tell who the customers were who paid, but the store, in order to convert these payments into money, has to take them to a particular entity and cash them in, and thus the amount that each store received is established. We designed it this way because we do not want it to help tax evasion, but we do want people's purchases to be anonymous. Now, you put this together with some sort of system where a whole bunch of local stores will receive a package for you with a code, and you just go there with the code and collect it, and you don't have to show an ID because you've got the code. This will make it possible to do anonymous purchases even for physical goods. But when it comes to something that's not physical, like paying toll or paying for a download, that's straightforward. As long as you're doing the other things to maintain your anonymity, like going through Tor, making sure you don't log in, that your browser isn't fingerprintable, things like this, you'll get anonymous browsing even when you have to pay for it. Now, I don't care if I see an ad on the screen. I'm very good at ignoring ads, but I hate tracking. So I've done things in my browser that save me from being tracked. They also block the ads, which for me is a secondary point. But I'm willing to go to great lengths to avoid surveillance, and that means that when a periodical says the only way to see our articles is either see the ads and be tracked or subscribe and be tracked, I say it's off limits to me. I can't look there. But I'd pay. If I could pay anonymously, I'd pay to see the articles I want to see. That's what we've got to insist on. We've got to make sure that we have a society in which data is not being massively collected about us, because data once collected will be misused. It can be misused by the organization that collected it. It can be misused by rogue employees of that organization. It can be stolen in a data breach and then misused by others, or it can be taken by the state and misused by the state, which is the biggest danger of all. And we have to stop all those things from happening, and the way is, don't let the data be collected.